8th of November 2016. Item 1 is apologies. I've received apologies from Councillor Mrs Val Springett, and I've also had notice from Councillor de Wiggendon that he is running slightly late. No other apologies, I don't think. Takes us nicely to item 2, notification of substitute members.
Good evening, Mr Chairman. It's Councillor Garton on behalf of Councillor Springett.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 3, urgent items. I think you all have in front of you an update for agenda item 17. This was in fact anticipated because it is the result of the Staplehurst referendum, so I've agreed that that be presented as an urgent item update. Have you all had sufficient time to familiarise yourselves with it? Has everybody had a chance to read it? So, thank you. So we need no further time on that. Agenda item 4, if I could take notification of visiting members. I'll start from my right and work around the room, if I may. If you say it, and I'll repeat it for the webcast. So, Councillor Baltham, item 21. Constitutionally, if you could say which item, if you want to say all items and withdraw, then we're technically correct, but is it just the local plan item? Item 19. Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Daly, item 21. Councillor Willis? Item 21 as well. Councillor Vizard, item 21. I think that's everything. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, please? I see that there are none. None noted. Apologies, I did skip the housekeeping bit, but if I just do that, particularly in relation to recording. So just to say, we're not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so if it does sound, please remain seated, and Mrs Matthews to my right will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. But also to say that today's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. And I see that no one is indicating that they are recording, so apologies for not dealing with that earlier. Disclosures we dealt with. Disclosures of lobbying. Councillor English.
I have been lobbied by County Councillor Rob Bird and others on item 21.
That's duly noted. For my own part, I've certainly had discussions with various people on that item. I don't regard it as lobbying, but it's certainly well discussed. Is there anyone else for lobbying, please? Okay, thank you. Presentation of petitions. I am advised that there are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 9, questions and answers session for members of the public. Again, I've not been advised of any questions. Not doing very well this evening, am I, hey? Okay, so questions dealt with. Back to agenda item 7 that I missed. So that's the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of October 2016. As per the papers, agenda item 7 commencing on page 1. I trust you've all had a chance to read them. Are you content that they are a fair copy from the last note from the last meeting? Can I be agreed? Thank you. Councillor English.
I know it's fairly obvious, but given we have two councillors Burton on the council, I think it would be appropriate to note that it was Councillor David Burton who was appointed by this committee, just for the avoidance of doubt.
Okay, I think that's noted in the record now, rather than an amendment that we'd already agreed. But yes, confusing, isn't it? Agenda item 10, there are no yellow papers this evening, so I don't believe that we need to take any items in private. Is that agreed, members? I'll just quickly deal with agenda item 11 and 12. Then I have received a request that we bring agenda item 21 first. I think there's a number of members of the public perhaps, and some younger ones that perhaps would wish to leave as early as possible. So with your agreement, members, agenda item 21 will come up. Councillor English?
I really must apologise, but I've noticed another mistake on the same, well, not an actual mistake as opposed to a clarification on agenda minute item 86. I'm sorry to go back, but it was a reference from communities, housing and environment, not heritage, culture and leisure.
So if I might suggest, since we've formally dealt with the minutes, if we minute that on tonight's meeting just as a separate observation, would that be content? Thank you. So agenda item 11 is the work programme circulated with the papers. The only thing I would particularly wish to draw to your attention that Vice Chair and I have discussed the next meeting, and as things stand, there is very little business for the next meeting, and given the workload in the background for officers with regard to the local plan, we have provisionally cancelled the next meeting. If anything of an urgent nature does surface, then obviously we can look at that again, but as it stands, the next meeting I do not believe is necessary. Councillor Pendergast.
I'd just like to make a comment on agenda item 11. I see retrospective planning applications and enforcement is a date to be confirmed in the future. But I just like, as we are having the workshop on the 27th of January, can I suggest that we make that date shortly after that so we have momentum and, you know, it's fresh in our minds. I think that would be a good idea. It's an issue that's important across the borough, so that's it, just a comment.
So just for the sake of clarity, if I just recap that we received a formal request from Councillor Mrs Springett to give some consideration to enforcement matters. So there's a formal request for it to be an agenda item in consultation with Planning Committee Chair and Vice Chair. We agreed that the first stage would be to have a fairly extensive workshop highlighting all of the issues contained within enforcement, so that would give us a good knowledge base to then consider a formal report. And I think what you're saying is that you're keen to see that firmed up, as I think all of us are. So again, in conjunction with the Vice Chair, if it's appropriate that we can have that in the February, but if not, perhaps the March meeting, that would be our target timescale. Councillor English.
Not to preempt the outcome of the discussion at the committee meeting, but I think we might need to actually flag up that there might need to be changes to the Council's scheme of delegation for this, because the current situation, we are actually unable to bring enforcement matters to committee. So I just think that it needs to be flagged up, that needs to be part of the discussion at that meeting.
Yes, I think that would be something to cover within the report, and then I would assume that the process would be to make a recommendation to the Democracy Committee, and then it would refer to full council if it was felt appropriate to change the scheme of delegated powers. So perhaps the relevant officers that will be involved in formulating that report to follow the enforcement training would take a note of that now. It would be one of the aspects that we want to consider. I don't think there's anything further to add on the work programme, so that was just for noting, members. So we could now move to agenda item 21. And I believe that Mr. Egerton, you are going to introduce the report to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. On the 11th of October 2016, an informative report was presented to this committee to draw attention to Tunbridge and Morling's early stage Regulation 18 consultation. This early stage consultation, published on the 30th of September this year, sets out the issues that need to be addressed by Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council in its forthcoming local plan to 2031 and a potential development strategy for the way forward, as well as associated technical documents. It follows a call for sites exercise which took place between April 2014 and the 1st of September 2015 and received over 250 submissions. Following this consultation, Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council's local plan timetable also proposes consultation in April 2017 on its preferred option. The next formal consultation, Regulation 19, will then be on the proposed submission version of the local plan, which is due to take place in September 2017. The consultation document includes the following key points: a requirement to meet a housing need of 13,920 or 696 homes per year, an additional 6,000 homes overall once existing planning permissions and known sites are taken into consideration, a need to find up to 33 hectares of employment land, a need to work out a strategy for accommodating growth that consider land adjacent to a range of settlements, including urban areas, look at land in the least constrained parts of the borough or land close to transport hubs, a mixed portfolio of sites, both big and small, and consider a sustainable level of growth to facilitate improvements to infrastructure. A map providing potential development strategy in this regard is attached to Appendix A of this report. The potential strategy includes a number of sites that are near to the border with Maidstone Borough, including termed South Aylesford and Ditton. I draw the committee's attention to paragraph 2.7 of the agenda report that sets out that this area is worthy of further consideration as a strategic development opportunity, unquote. Excluding potential residential development at East Malling Research and excluding potential employment uses, 8 sites are located in the vicinity of Hermitage Lane, producing a yield of approximately 2,730 residential units, although this figure is heavily caveated in the Tunbridge and Morling consultation documents. Having considered comments from members, officers have produced a proposed response to the consultation expressing significant concerns regarding the proposals, and this is attached as Appendix A to the report. Given the limited detail provided in the consultation, the response seeks to focus on key concerns associated with the location of new development near to Maidstone Borough. It also considers the current issues in this area with a focus on current transport problems and the potential additional negative impact of the proposed future development. The response also highlights concerns regarding air quality and open space as examples of matters requiring further detailed consideration. It is apparent that some concerns, particularly transport-related issues, will also require Kent County Council to take ownership and responsibility to ensure appropriate resolution and mitigation. The response also highlights this issue. Whilst individual members may wish to send their own response to this early stage consultation, committee members are asked to consider the proposed Maidstone Borough Council response and its suitability for sending to Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council by the 25th of November deadline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egerton. So members will recall that we did discuss this item at the last meeting and gave officers some key steers to formulate this response. And that's the draft that we have with us this evening. I'm going to take visiting members next. I'm going to start, as I did before, from the right and work around in a clockwise manner. So, Councillor Borton. I don't want to preempt what anybody is going to say. I suspect there may be some repeating themes, so I would ask you all to be as concise as possible, and if you are in agreement with what was previously said, you can just say that rather than repeat it again. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. And as many committee members are probably aware, this is a huge issue up in the west of Maidstone and the impact that Hermitage Lane has on all communities, not just in the ward, but the neighbouring wards as well. I obviously read this with a lot of interest, the draft letter that was drafted by the officers in Appendix B of your report in front of us. And there's a few things I'd like to raise. It's an incredibly strong letter in my mind, and I think it misses a fundamental point, which is certainly what residents tell me in Fants Ward, is that actually the problems are, we are speaking as if Tunbridge and Malling can resolve most of the problems here, but in fact many people tell me that actually it's the houses in Maidstone Borough which have caused an awful lot of the problems, as well as some of the development that's happened elsewhere. I'll be very brief, Mr Chairman, but I just wanted to look at one particular paragraph, which is a paragraph which goes over the page, so to speak, in front of us. 4 lines in particular, the current problems around Hermitage Lane and the A20 must be addressed, and the proposal to investigate a longer-term solution to transport challenges in the vicinity is welcomed. Well, obviously, this is going to require Kent County Council's view as well on it, but I think that needs to be refined to not necessarily say the current problems around Hermitage Lane. It needs to indicate which particular bit of Hermitage Lane, the Tunbridge and Malling bit or the Maidstone bit, because there's certainly problems in the Maidstone bit as far as I can see. And then later on in the paragraph, it talks about regarding mitigating congestion and improving traffic flows in the area just over the page. Well, again, I think we need to separate. Are we talking about the Tunbridge and Malling bit of the road, or are we talking about the Maidstone bit of the road here? Because from all the comments I've received from people in Fant Ward, the Maidstone bit of the road and the queues that we get at the 2 sets of crossroads at the south end are past the problem as well. So I think in terms of the response, I think that the letter in front of us needs a fair bit of refinement, in all honesty. Whether we like it or not, this council is going to have to work with Tunbridge and Malling as they go through this process, just as they've had to work with us as we've gone through our process. I think we need to be a critical friend, so to speak. This is clearly an area which both councils have had their eye on. I think what's happened so far has been to a detriment of residents up there, and we need to do all we can to prevent that being the case. But then I also think this council needs to be absolutely clear about what it can do, what Tunbridge and Malling can do, and what Kent County Council can do as well. So I just hope the committee can take those points into consideration, can focus on separating the Maidstone bit of the road from the Tunbridge and Malling bit of the road, and perhaps suggest some refinements to the letter in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. That's noted by the members. Councillor Clark, I think you were just for item 19, weren't you? Yes. Councillor Daly, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to read the report, and I'm very pleased to see the letter which will possibly be attached to it as it goes forward. I think that most of the items which I would have wanted to see covered have been covered, and I'm particularly pleased to see in section 211 the question of not just the congestion but the air quality, which I think is concerning us all at the moment. Enough has been said about Hermitage Lane, I think, to write 3 books, but we need to know, and we need to let everybody know, that what may be proposed within the section the amount which is coming forward from Tunbridge and Malling as sites which might be approved as a call for sites could produce double the amount already given permission in that area. And I think that what I am trying to do as a county councillor at the moment is to talk to the Highway Authority, and we have got at the moment going on a plan for trying to find out exactly what is the capacity of Hermitage Lane and its junctions currently. Because I think from that we need to know then what the mitigation may be necessary to accommodate what is coming forward from Maidstone already in its plan, and then also to see what might be necessary later on. Because we know that some of the junctions, particularly the motorway junction at the moment, is at capacity or maybe over capacity. So the mitigations which are taking place to accommodate the particular developments which are not yet there but are going to be there will actually allow perhaps those developments to go forward. But a loading on top of that will bring it back to where it was, and unfortunately we can't keep on mitigating mitigation. It's just not possible. You can't keep on increasing capacities of roads and junctions. So that is all I'm going to say on that particular score. But the other thing that concerns, I think, most of us in the area is not just the congestion of the traffic, but it is, in fact, the congestion of the building that's in a ribbon, as it were, causing coalescence between all the various habitations along the route. We've got Allington now almost joined up to Ditton, and the whole thing is going to become one complete urbanised area, where at the moment we've got some open countryside which helps to allow people to breathe within that. But in addition to the housing, there are the commercial activities which take place in that area. We've got the 2020 industrial site with its power plant there, the waste-to-energy plant, with 500,000 tonnes of stuff which is being processed there. But then we've got the Gallagher Quarry in Hermitage Lane, which is relying on a free flow of traffic northwards from the quarry, because southwards there is already a lorry ban. So we've got to be careful that we don't stunt the ability of that very large employer and very large earner for the local area to be cut off. His product range is increasing now. They're able to use much more of what they produce from, not just Ragstone, but the rest of it, which means that there's going to be much more commercial traffic on that road. In addition to which, of course, we do have a thing called a general hospital. And I think that the general hospital now has been kicked gently, asking them to respond as they never have before in all these planning applications coming through. I don't think they've actually raised any points before. I think we're going to see something there. So, Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity of saying what I'm saying now. I hope some of this will be taken on board. But the letter which is going to go with the accompaniment of this, I think really ought to be making sure that we look at the overall capacity of the road capability, which we are now looking at to see whether we can come forward with figures which will help. It's not been, the total capacity of Hermitage Lane has never recently been justified, I think, and we've got to look forward to that. So thank you for all the time now. I agree.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I'm just wondering whether it would actually be useful to get Mr. Jarman to comment particularly about the traffic modelling issues that Councillor Daly has raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Hopefully it provides more context. As you alluded to, Chairman, for our examination and in order to get a statement of common ground between us and Highways England, we have commissioned Mott MacDonald to do modelling and mitigation of each of the motorway junctions. So that does include Junction 5. All the fine detail, and there is a lot of fine detail, is on the website, on the examination website. Perhaps Cheryl could send a bespoke link to the relevant section of the website. I'd like to agree with the councillors that the central point of the letter is to say that we do want to work with Tunbridge and Morling on what is classic duty to cooperate territory, in that there's clear cross-boundary infrastructure. Junction 5, Cold Harbour, Hermitage Lane. I mean, to my mind, it's irrelevant which part of the administrative board they are, but they clearly have an effect on both boroughs. So to my mind, there's an urgent need to have structured meetings with T&M, obviously, but Kent County Council, Highways in particular, as councillors have said, and last but by no means least, Highways England, because this is all filtering into Junction 5. And the queues I see 5 days a week stretch back from Junction 5 back to our Junction 7 and seem to be going further eastward. And lastly, again, there's urgency here. Just as an example, I'm very well aware that, rightly or wrongly, a government inspector has allowed 500 houses, as Councillor Daly knows, on land east of Hermitage Lane. A Section 106 has been signed between Crowdace Homes and Kent County Council. To be simplistic about it, there's significant sums of money in there to be spent on mitigation for junctions and public transport in the form of bus transport. So, and dare I say it, that I expect on the other side of the border more housing developments to come along, hopefully with Section 106 monies. There's an urgent need, in my opinion, to agree what that mitigation is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Councillor Willis, would you like to have a go?
I agree with what councillors have said so far and the take on the highways, the officer's expert view on the highways issue. The letter in response to consultation is written in the context that we realise we've built houses or building houses in that area ourselves, so we totally understand that. But the most important thing on the letter, on that, with that in mind, I think, is the final paragraph to be beefed up a little bit to make it very clear to Tunbridge and Morley that we want to work with them on the plan and make sure that we work together to make sure the two key issues. So we want to work with them, which is the most important thing that I feel as a member we've got to start doing, otherwise we're going to lose out big time. And the two key issues are open space, which is mentioned in the fourth paragraph. So the mention of coalescence, which I think is a more technical word, Officer Egerton, is that the... Officer Egerton, that's nice. Yeah. So coalescence, but really importantly, there is no open space, and perhaps working with Officer Jarman, we're aware that really is need in that area for somewhere for residents to recreate, a decent quality area of open space, that kind of wording, some quality open space. And the other thing is within Hermitage Lane, transport-wise, there's been hundreds of comments on Facebook. I'm sure there'll be many mentions from people about the condition, the state of Hermitage Lane and the work that people are trying to do to find a way around that. So there needs to be a solution to that, but also that I ask that must also involve sustainable transport as well. And the bypass that Tunbridge and Morley are mentioning with this huge amount of houses, they mention a bypass, I think that's the right terminology for it. Can we make sure the word sustainable transport is mentioned? So what I mean by that is bus priority measures. If you're building a new road, make sure that public transport can use it adequately and it actually gives people a chance. The hospital are desperate for better public transport. It's a real pity they've only started telling us that in the last year, but they are desperate for better public transport to that hospital, and that would be one way of getting perhaps up to 10% of the traffic from Hermitage Lane. But other than that, it's a good letter, and we'd like perhaps those three areas beefed up. Open spaces, as a local member, I can only ask that for the committee to consider. Open spaces in that area, to work with Tunbridge and Morley. We accept that we've done our bit of building, but to work with them, they're trying to build far more in their backwater, and to make sure that real consideration is made of the congestion in Hermitage Lane, and also whether we can look at sustainable transport as taking 10% off that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
I'm going to go to bed now.
Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Chairman. Very little to add. The gentleman that are before me and the officers that are here quite adequately emphasised most of the problems that we've got. The only one that I do have is that air quality was mentioned, and obviously with the amount of vehicles that will be using Hermitage Lane, it needs to be very, very strongly addressed one way or another, because it's the knock-on effect is to the health of the residents in the area, and that's not just our Mason Borough Council residents, it will also be the Tunbridge and Morling residents. So that was the only thing I would like to be beefed up, is obviously the air quality needs to be resolved some more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll open the debate to members now. I'm going to start on my right. Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't got too much to add. I agree with a lot of the comments from my fellow councillors this evening. I was particularly interested in Mr Jarman's comments about Highways England, and I wondered if it was possible, please, for us to actually include Highways England with the co-working. So on that last paragraph, we worked jointly with Kent County Council and Highways England. Thank you.
I think what I'll try and do is make a list of these specifics as we go, and then we can try and tie it up at the end. Councillor English.
Yes. First of all, may I say I agree with Mr Jarman's interpretation on the highways issues. Tempting though it is, basically this is a road network, and slicing it into pieces according to administrative boundaries, tempting though it is, isn't actually a very good planning approach, particularly if we're going to look at duty to cooperate. So that's first point. I did send Mr Jarman and yourself, Mr Chairman, a number of detailed comments, which I'm now going to refer. First of all, starting with paragraph 4, in terms of the specific reference to severe traffic congestion in the letter, I understand that there are problems there, but severe within the context of highways has a particular technical meaning that almost any other synonym doesn't. So I just want to be sure that we are saying what we mean here, because that has, within highways context, a particular technical meaning which other synonyms for that word do not. So that's one thing, that's just one issue. Now, turning to the rest of the letter, I think it's very good. My only real problem with it is that the issues relating to open space and air quality sort of appear in the middle after a section on traffic, and we make references to that. Then we go back to traffic. It would really sit better if the letter went through all the traffic issues and then up the open space and air quality issues as a single combined paragraph, rather than starting, then going to depart on those issues and then coming back to the highway issues, if you see what I mean. It doesn't really read particularly correctly there. So I'd like to suggest removing the second sentence of paragraph 5, so that it would then read without that, and then continuing the first sentence of paragraph 6 with the combining the first sentence of paragraph 6 with the remainder of paragraph 5 to form a new paragraph 5. And then the new paragraph 6 would be slightly reworded to say, and I would pick up the points that the previous speakers made, so it would then say, the measures adopted should consider, and then proceed as written, and that would be fine. And at the end of that, we would add a new sentence: the retention and provision of open space, including areas of landscape semi-natural open space, as an integral part of any development proposals, is crucial to preventing the coalescence of the Maidstone and Morling urban areas, which has been a shared priority for both planning authorities for a considerable time. Consideration also needs to be given as a priority to minimising air quality impacts for the use of appropriate landscaping provisions. Now that picks up landscape air quality in about the only way it's practical to address it, which is through landscape planting. It also picks up the point about open space, because what we have here in the letter is open space, which does not in any way refer to natural or semi-natural open space. So it could be football fields, it could be playing fields, it could be very formal. And what we really need to do is prevent the coalescence, insofar as we can, of the urban area of Tunbridge, of Morley, I should say, and Maidstone. So I would think that if we did that, we would actually be addressing the very strong representations made by the visiting members this evening. And finally, in the last paragraph, paragraph 7 as exists, I think we should indeed pick up what my colleague has said about the Highways England as cooperation, but we need to pick up in this last paragraph the point about working jointly with Kent County Council and Tunbridge and Morling specifically needs to address both highways measures and sustainable transport measures. And that doesn't say that. I think it should say that, because that's what we're talking about, those two things. We could add open space in there as well, but certainly the first two are priorities, and it doesn't address those. So I think I have provided that letter, which I've just read out, to Mr Jarman and to the Chairman, and I can provide additional copies if members want them. That people know the detailed suggestions I was making.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mortimer?
Thank you. What passed my mind when I was first read this, and I was becoming aware of it, is are Tunbridge and Morley going to produce an ITS or some sort of transport plan, because they're in the same situation as we are to a certain extent. So would that be a good idea if we could persuade Tunbridge and Morling to do that, or would you think it would be detrimental to Maidstone?
We'll have to check with them. I'm conscious that a lot of authorities in Kent don't produce ITSs. They rely on the KCC's local transport plan. For instance, Swale do. I must admit, I don't know the situation in Tunbridge and Moorland. It might be that they're perfectly happy with their LTP.
Thank you for that clarification. Are you finished, Councillor Mortimer? Councillor Garton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do concur with Councillor Bolton in that it is a very strong letter and it needs some sort of refinements, because after all we want to work with Tunbridge and Morling and cooperate with them. And the style of this letter very much is like, well, we kick the door in and then we offer some cooperation later on. So I would like to bring very much the paragraph 7 or the first sentence of paragraph 7 in front of the existing paragraph 3, i.e. putting the invitation to cooperate before we make our representations, just as a matter of politeness. So it should read then something like, I would like to move the following representations on behalf of Maidstone Borough Council and offer to work constructively with Tunbridge and Morling Council to consider these matters in the future and establish mutually acceptable solutions through the duty to cooperate. And then we can continue with a list of our improvements.
Thank you. Councillor English, did you want to say something again?
I would just say that that's acceptable if to me, if it's the slightly expanded paragraph I was referring to, which specifically referenced highways and sustainable transport in that paragraph, because I think that does sort of amplify what it is we're wanting to cooperate with them on, which I think is not something unacceptable to Councillor Garden. I would like to know the views of the professional officers on the admittedly fairly detailed points that I raised, and which Mr Jarman has had sight of for some time.
they're acceptable to me. And I do take your point about making specific reference to sustainable transport, because I think all councillors are very concerned about air quality on both sides of the administrative boundary, and that's a clear way of improving air quality.
Right. I think it would be impossible to revise this letter actually by committee this evening. And I do think it would on this occasion be appropriate to leave that to officers to undertake using their delegated powers. I think that we've made it very clear the key phrases, the paragraphs and the thrust of some parts of the letter. Do members support that view?
Very briefly, I think there is only one issue that is in dispute. I think members were reasonably okay with, I've certainly accepted Councillor Gold. I think members were okay with most of what I said, certainly officers were. I think the only issue is whether we are trying to de-aggregate the road between the administrative authority areas. Personally, I'm against it, but I do think we need to actually, as a committee, give a steer one way or the other to the officers, because the point's been raised. And we do need to actually, personally, I think the road network needs to be treated as a whole, but I think we do need, as a committee, to make a view on that.
Well, my personal view is that that should be borne out in the modelling work that presumably TNM will need to do to support their proposals. Now, I think there's modelling work on the motorway junctions, but this is something that we touched on at the last meeting. It was, what about the non-strategic network, i.e. Hermitage Lane itself, both ends A20, and their ability to service the area generally and feed into the strategic network, the motorways. So if we could capture the need for that modelling in the whole,
I think that does lead us to assume that we are treating it as a single network.
yeah, it has to be. You know, the administrative boundary is an imaginary line on a map. And so I think, okay, the nods around the table make that crystal clear that, you know, we're looking at this in the whole, and that links in with the duty to cooperate. But I think the letter needs to put a responsibility on T&M to do that further modelling work to prove it. So just by way of recap, there was some talk about the sequencing of the letter. There was the cooperation with Highways England. There was concern about the measured word severe, appropriate or otherwise. I think we wanted some enhancement to the willingness to cooperate and the involvement of, you know, all of the parties in that. Substantial open spaces.
I think the key word here is semi-natural.
Semi-natural, but I think, or perhaps you'd support me in, you know, we're looking for substantial amount of open space. We're not looking for a wild grass verge, are we, between two rows of houses? We're looking for something meaningful.
But the key word is two key words, substantial and semi-natural.
Semi-natural, yes. I'm just trying to see if there are any other key phrases. Then yes, there are the words
two
that
more,
used
Mr.
around.
Chairman. Appropriate planting to mitigate and, if possible, improve the air quality. And the point about sustainable transport on highways under the duty to cooperate.
Okay. So with all of those key elements in mind, may I suggest that the recommendation per the papers is modified to read something like: the committee agrees the essence of the formal response to Tunbridge and Malling, Borough Council Local Plan Reg 18, but asks officers to make a further revision reflecting the discussion this evening under delegated powers. So I'll move that from the chair. Councillor Mrs Grigg, I think, was the fastest off the blocks on this occasion. Those in favour? And that's unanimous and therefore agreed, and that completes agenda item 21. We could now move back to the running order of the agenda, and we're going to pick up at 13. And this was a reference from Planning Committee.
Oh, sorry.
Outside bodies. Yes, outside bodies. So we could deal with that quickly. Are there any members that have attended any outside bodies directly relevant to this committee since the last meeting?
Yes, but there's nothing specifically to report that's worth it.
Right. For my own part, I would just mention that I attended the Kent County Council Select Committee looking at buses, subsidised bus services, where they wanted to ask a few questions about the Quality Bus Partnership. So I attended with that hat on behalf of this committee. And their evidence will be published in due course if any members are interested to follow that. I don't have anything else to report, so that's all there is for item 12 on this occasion. So now we'll move to 13. This is the reference for Planning Committee. And I think Councillor English, as Vice Chair of Planning Committee, you're probably best placed to indicate what was being asked.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. When this came to Planning Committee, it became immediately obvious that all the objections to the planning application for the housing development weren't actually to the planning application, but were to the actual parking situation that would obtain in West Street if the planning application were granted. Clearly, planning applications shouldn't be refused if there is a solution, but the solution doesn't fall within planning control. So clearly the Planning Committee felt it appropriate by a unanimous vote to make a second resolution asking for the Council to explore the possibility of imposing a traffic regulation order in cooperation with the County Council. The reason it came here was specifically because under a current situation, whilst the Joint Transport Board obviously is the recipient in due course and the way which we feed into making traffic regulation orders or not, it isn't actually possible for the Council or a committee of the Council to take a view prior to going to JTB, other than sending it here, which this committee, under the constitutional clarifications that took place earlier in the year, is responsible for minor residual highways issues. So the Planning Committee in that, and of course would also be responsible for enforcing any traffic regulation order that were imposed. There are two options available to the committee. It can express an opinion on this, and then it would, of course, have to be referred to the JTB to actually make an order, or it can pass it on to the Joint Transport Board without making any recommendation. I express no personal preference as to which. It would be slightly easier if the committee made a recommendation, but it does not have to do so. It could simply pass it on to the Joint Transport Board without passing comment. That would simply be a way of ensuring that it appeared formally on the agenda without having to go through any of the other ways it could be done.
Thank you, Councillor.
I can come back if there are any questions.
So I think we're quite clear that it needs to end up with the Joint Transportation Board. Okay. I've looked at this in a little bit of detail, but there seems to me to be no reason why the Planning Committee cannot make a reference directly to the Joint Transportation Board. I personally think that's the cleanest way of doing it, because then those that are referring it are well placed to speak directly to the board, rather than if we refer it and then we draw back someone else. Councillor English, come back on that.
That's fine. If the Strategic Planning Committee indicates to the Planning Committee that's how it wishes to handle it in future, that can be done. What the Planning Committee were very rightly concerned about was trespassing on your area of responsibility, because in the council's constitution it is clear that minor highways issues are the purview of this committee, but it is quite within this committee's view to say that those matters should be referred directly to the JTB, but we did not feel it was right to do so without your consent.
Well, I think that's very clear, and I look towards other members to have a view on this. Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit, when I first read this report, I was rather confused as to why it had come to us. And I think we've got to be careful that we don't open a can of worms by getting too involved with this and then opening our door for every parking restriction to come to us in the future. I think I would definitely be proposing that we refer this to JTB without making recommendation.
So, for the sake of clarity, that we respond to Planning Committee that they should refer it directly, rather than us playing a nonsense in-between role. Yeah. Councillor English.
Do that. You make it clear you're not just talking about this particular reference.
Councillor de Wigenden, and then I'll ask Mr Jarman to contribute.
Yeah, I think that's important, because the first thing I saw of this is because when we have been making allocations over past years, lots of the objections we have had have been similar to this. And my first thought was, you know, we are opening a can of worms to be reviewing all of these in the future and saying, you know, was that right? Did we need to do that at the time? So I do think if Planning Committee comes up with something specific like this, that they should be referring it directly and not having us reopen it.
I'll come to Mr Jarman, but I think almost what you said there nails it. It's about being very specific of what you want the JTB to do. You know, if you're asking for a traffic regulation order, ask them for one and suggest what it might be, rather than the more investigative, you know, can you have a look at this? But I think that's the crux of it. Mr Jarman, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I agree with what you've just said, Chairman and Councillor de Wigenden. I do take Councillor English's constitutional point. It might be the case in future, it might not be, that if there was an application of a much larger scale, say 100 houses, and it was very specific as to why there was a need for a traffic regulation order, was it because it was causing inconvenience, was it causing a genuine safety problem, then I think that's a different matter. Okay.
You look like you're poised to want to speak, Councillor Mrs Prendergast.
Just coming back on what Mr Jarman has said, I think that will be happening, because we had at Planning Committee Staplehurst several hundred houses that would require a traffic regulation order. So should that then come to this committee, or it's a little unclear? No?
If Planning Committee are almost making an advisory that should be the case, then it needs to go directly to those that would be able to implement it. I don't think there's anything we can add. So there's a danger of setting a precedent here that may in future not be appropriate, and I think members of the Planning Committee would still need to use judgment as to whether it is appropriate to go directly to JTB. You know, if they felt it was necessary, of course, we'll always receive it here and give a further view. But there's an element of judgment for members to make there. So may we conclude this one? So what I'm going to suggest is that we refer back to Planning Committee and invite them to make a specific request directly to Joint Transportation Board. So,
that is also, you know, setting out subject to the caveats that's just been mentioned. I'm sure legal will.
So, shall we just say on a non-presidential basis?
I do think we're clearer than that, because we can't keep coming to you and saying, do you want it or don't you? We have to have some sort of guidance as to whether you're saying this is not just this specific instance, but similar instance.
I think that the way we should summarise is in a matter similar as this, directly to, but judgment to be used by planning committee if they felt the circumstances were significantly different. Yes, yes. Look at members happy with that. Do we need to repeat any of those words to you? Okay, so I move that, seconded by Councillor Wigan, and I think got there quickly on that. Those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you, members.
Mr. Chairman, I thought there was a time constraint. Do they have time?
I think the JTB is next week.
I was just concerned they then had time to refer it and wouldn't need us to...
Okay, well, the agenda-setting meeting is, I think, later this week, so I don't think they will have time to refer it for this meeting because it will need to go back to planning committee. So unless they're meeting this Thursday, that's not going to be possible. Unless the chairman of JTB takes it as an urgent item. But they know the protocols and the procedures to consider that. And then the next one, I think, is January after that. Okay, where have we got to? Agenda item 14, I think we're looking at next. Finance and business improvement. So the second quarter budget monitoring, and I think Mr. Green will just introduce this to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the regular quarterly monitoring report setting out financial performance of the services within your committee's remit for the year to date and giving a projection to the end of the current financial year. The position is summarised on page 21, and you can see from this that there's a mixed picture, some overspends against budget, some underspends. Projected outturn, though, is 110,000 underspend against the budget for the year. The main variances, first of all, favourable variance on parking. Pay and display car parks have performed better than budget. Against that more positive performance, though, must be offset a shortfall on Moat Park. That's the good news. Not such good news on development management, where we're overspending on staffing costs, both because the numbers are greater than in the budget, and also we've got a number of agency staff who cost more per head than permanent staff. Because there are a number of issues around the planning service and the budget, we're considering later on the agenda a proposal for a review of the planning service, and I'll leave that to Mr. Cornell to introduce. Just to put this in context, although the position for this committee is positive in that it's underspending against its budget, for the Council as a whole, for the first 6 months, we're projecting an overspend of nearly 500,000, and because we don't want to have that continue to the year end, we do want to get back to a balanced position. There's a number of measures that we're taking across the Council to try to recover, and those are set out in paragraph 2.7 of the report. We're looking closely at any requests for new recruitment. We're scrutinising use of temporary staff. We're trying to cut back on any discretionary spending, any spending to which the Council isn't committed. And I hope that through these measures we'll get back on track for the current financial year. And this is important because looking beyond the current financial year, we do have over the next 5 years a budget gap of just over £4 million. So we want to make sure that at the very least we get back on track by the end of this year, and so that we don't have to find an even bigger amount of money when we're setting our budget for the next 5 years. The overall budget position will come to this committee in January when we're presenting proposals. So that's for the future. For the time being, this report's just dealing with this year's position. happy to answer any questions that members may have on the report.
So, members, we're only being asked to, in actual fact, note this report this evening. Are there any specifics that you want to put to officers? May I take it that it is agreed to note the report? Is that agreed? Thank you. Similar exercise again at agenda item 15, and it's the strategic plan performance update, and I believe, Ms Collier, you're going to lead us?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. This is the Q2 performance report. It provides progress against the key performance indicators relevant to this committee before the full set is presented to Policy and Resources Committee on the 23rd of November. It also provides updates against the key strategies, plans and a mid-year update of progress against the Strategic Plan Action Plan. Overall, I'm pleased to say that it is excellent progress of those targeted key performance indicators, which can be seen on pages 40 and 41. The direction is either maintained or upwards, and both indicators are green. And I think you can see from both those indicators that there's a very sort of positive picture. There are two indicators which are not targeted. One of those might seem random to the committee. This is the first time it's appeared on in the report, and that is the percentages of parishes satisfied with the level of communication and engagement. This is because this indicator is only produced once this year, and we've included it for all committees as a matter of interest. Only one of the strategies update is not green, and that is the integrated transport strategy, which is at amber, and I'm sure that the best person to comment on that will be Mr Jarman if you've got any questions. But I'm happy to take questions on any of the indicators or updates provided.
I'd like to think the members of this committee are quite expert on that as well, seeing as they're the ones that took it to the stage that it's at. A couple of raised hands. I actually saw Councillor Garton first.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm just a bit puzzled about this priority one, the survey with the parish councils. I mean, it's statistics, but I mean, we can gloss it either which way. Here we've got 38.3% of happy parishes or parish councillors. 32% are, well, neither happy nor unhappy. Leaves us still almost 30% of very unhappy parishes. So I think we need far more detail on this item.
Could you add to that how that was collected as a survey view, please?
Okay, all parish councillors were sent a link to complete a survey. It was a indicator selected by members for inclusion in the strategic plan. So I think it says they were sent the link to complete between July and October. Not all of them did complete it, and reminders were sent as well. And there was a variety of questions around communication and engagement with the council, in addition to the level of satisfaction. And now this will be taken forward in terms of the comments that were raised and some of the additional information that was provided to look at how we engage with parish councillors in the future.
Thank you. You're finished, Councillor Garton, yes? Councillor English, then Councillor de Wigenden.
62 out of, so we got, I think, 37 parish councils, 5 parishes without a council, so presumably they weren't included because, or were parish meeting chairman mailed as well, isn't it? Just because obviously they don't have parish councils, and it would have been interesting to know what the 5 parish meeting chairmen also thought. That 62 is a is quite a low percentage. The average parish council has a clerk plus usually a minimum of, an average minimum of 7 members, times 37. It's quite a high figure, which we didn't get any sort of response to. So whilst I know that surveys, particularly for those people who are satisfied, actually tend not to be returned, I think we do need to think about how we increase the return, because 62 out of quite a few hundred, I haven't done the maths, is because I don't know the exact size of every single parish council, but some of them have got 15 members plus the clerk. So there could have been potentially quite a few more. And just at that minor point, did we include parish meeting, Chairman? Because that's 5 parishes that don't have a council, but they probably should have been included.
It sounds like you're questioning our ability to communicate a survey to the parishes. Almost.
Well, I sort of am in a way. I mean, not to be critical, but the list is constantly changing, and it is very hard to keep up with. So I think we need to give some thought about that, because it's very much a moving target, and that is not in any sense meant to be in any way a criticism of the officer. I think getting 62 is actually quite good.
Yeah.
But it is something I think we need to give some thought to, because it is quite a difficult audience to reach.
Perhaps the mechanism could be through the clerk rather than so that each council responds rather than each councillor. That might be worth considering. There's nothing to lose by adding. Ms. Collier?
Without wishing to speculate, but judging on some of the feedback that we got, I would guess that that some of the clerks did respond on behalf of the parishes, and perhaps that's why the figure was low. I don't know about the meetings. I'd have to check the list that we sent them to.
A final thought from me would be in the pure terms of phrasing the question, because I suspect there's a mixture of do we communicate well, as opposed to when we communicate or consult with, do we appear to take on board those views, which are very different things, and that might be worth drawing out in future questioning around that, if you get what I'm saying. Councillor Wigginen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 38% positive from this doesn't seem very good. But then those of us that live through concurrent functions would be amazed at the dramatic improvement, I would have thought. I think it is a useful measure, and it's useful to understand, because it will tell us how we are getting on with our parishes. Because the truth is, we often here make decisions which are very unpopular. Quite often they're unavoidable, but often you're quite right. It appears to them that we don't listen, and it appears to them that when they are being perfectly reasonable, we ignore them. So I think even if sometimes what we do means that figure goes down, I think it's useful to know and understand actually how we are dealing with the parishes.
If there's nothing further to add, again, we're simply asked to note on page 27, there's quite a lot of detail to what we're noting. So may we agree to note as per the papers? Is that agreed? Thank you, members. Mr. Cornwall, we're going to come to you next and some words about the planning review.
Thank you, Chairman. The proposed planning review is detailed in the report, but the main points I draw your attention to is the purpose being that we ensure that the department is structured in such a way that is best able to deliver Maystone's ambitious local plan. It will demonstrate and ensure that we have value for money for the service. It's aimed at improving user satisfaction with the service, and we will also identify means to shorten the end-to-end planning process so to respond to building government pressure on this front to all local authorities. The review will also maximise infrastructure and community benefit delivery through Section 106 and SIL, how we best capture those benefits. We'll look to see how we can best embed high-quality design in all applications consistently, and it will allow the planning staff and all the members of both the planning committees to help shape the overall service. The review has been scoped by the CEO, myself and colleagues from the planning team and the business improvement team too. The chair and vice chairs of both committees have been consulted on the proposed review, and we propose to commence the review in January 17 with all the recommendations implemented by the 30th of June 17. But I'll happily take any further questions members may have.
I don't think there's a lot we need to add at this stage because this is the beginning of the process. We'll have lots of opportunity to share views. And again, we're just needing to note the commencement of this work. So is that noted, members? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cornell. Item 17, this relates to the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan. We've agreed to take the urgent update report, and over to you, Mrs. Parks.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, members. Good evening, anybody who's watching. Thank you, first of all, Chair, and thank you to the committee for accepting the urgent update report. Unfortunately, the timescales, as per the government's drive to push neighbourhood planning through, means that in order to meet the next meeting of full council on the 7th of December, an urgent report was needed for this evening. This is the second neighbourhood plan referendum for Maidstone Borough, so it's a really good news story for us. Also, the high turnout and the resounding yes are a strong testament to the immense hard work and the dedication of the steering group at Staplehurst and the significant amount of stakeholder engagement that was undertaken in formulating the plan. That's something that was also highlighted by the plan examiner in his report. I've had cause to correspond regularly with the clerk and the steering group in recent months, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them because not only have they been keen to hear our views and thoughts, they've also taken on a number of suggestions that we've made to them and have been very keen to work collaboratively with us. The final stage for the plan now is to make it. So my report this evening sets out information about the referendum result and seeks the committee's recommendation to full council to make the plan at its next meeting, which is the 7th of December. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. I'm sure the whole committee would join me in congratulating Staplehurst on their result and all the hard work that went into it. And I think equally our own officer team and all the work that Mrs. Parks has been doing in the background to expedite matters. Good job done. We're simply asked to note the result, and I'm sure we're agreed to note the yes verdict. And we are asked to formally refer this to full council. Process says we have to do it, but if I move from the chair that we recommend to full council that the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Development Plan, the neighbourhood plan, is made and becomes part of the development plan for Maidstone. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor English was extremely fast there. Those in favour? That's simply unanimous. And we look forward to presenting that at full council. So well done everybody involved. More from Mrs. Parks. This is the update on the local plan, and I believe Councillor Clark will want to speak on this after. Sorry, Headcorn. Headcorn next. Yeah. I really think I ought to explain. I had a technical mishap with my briefing note earlier, so it's not pure incompetence. It's accentuated incompetence. So, Headcorn.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if maybe you were wanting to get home. So my second report this evening is purely for noting and is to provide you with some information on the Headcorn neighbourhood plan, which is also progressing. The committee will be fully aware of the somewhat drawn-out examination process for the Staplehurst and Headcorn plans. There have been a number of reports reported to this committee over recent months in that regard. Headcorn examiner was reappointed, and on examination of the materials in front of him, he did have some concerns following his review on a number of issues. There were a number of different issues raised through the consultation process, and also a huge volume of responses to that consultation, and he did note that it was one of the largest responses he had seen in his time as an examiner. Quite an unusual step for a neighbourhood plan to have a hearing. Really usually only happens where there are some major contentions between the plan and the representatives. To illustrate the point about the breadth of the issues, I did append to my report this evening the agenda for the hearing that was held on the 18th of October, so the committee are able to see the breadth of discussion that we had. I think I also noted in my report it was a very long day. We kicked off at 10 in the morning and we actually finished, I think, about 10 or 5 to 7 in the evening. Councillor Prendergast was there. So it was a very long day, but it was also a very good day, some very, very good debate, and also very, very good to see a huge number of residents of Headcorn in attendance throughout the day. As a result of the topics that were discussed through the hearings, there were a number of alterations proposed that came out of that discussion by Headcorn Parish Council and the steering group. On the back of that, the examiner now will obviously go away and will deliberate over the written material he has, the plan, the representations made through the consultation, and also the outcomes and discussions of that hearing, and he will use those to draw his conclusions. He has indicated that he's likely to take 3 to 4 weeks from the date of the hearing to produce his written report. So really we're looking at the earliest mid-November for receipt of that report. And he also indicated on the day that there would be, given the large number of changes that were mooted on the day by the Parish Council and Steering Group, potential recommendation for some further consultation on the plan before it moves to its next stage. So really, once I receive the report of the examiner, I will need to then bring a further report back to the committee outlining the examiner's findings and whether or not there is a need for a further consultation, whether modifications are required and the plan can move to referendum. We'll obviously have to await the outcomes of his report, but I will bring a further report back to this committee with that information in due course and make any appropriate recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Parks. I think that was very thorough and detailed. Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you. Just one question. I mean, I wasn't aware that a hearing was part of the mechanism for the neighbourhood plan. And could you tell me whether the costs are actually within the examination costs, or is it additional, or does the parish pay?
Unfortunately, no, the parish doesn't pay. The Borough Council will pick up the costs. I've had an invoice for the hall hire today actually arrive. But the government has put in place a grant funding system, and at given stages in plan making on a quarterly basis, the council can apply to the government for funding to reimburse the costs it's incurred. There is a stage at plan area designation, but unfortunately that's capped, so we can't claim any more there. But for successfully completed referendums, there is also an opportunity. So we have recently received the funding for the claim made against the North Lewes referendum, and that money is now with the council. There will be a further opportunity at the next quarterly stage in that system to update the number of plans that have reached the relevant stages, and so if any further funding is available, it will be sought at that time.
The reason I asked that is because I was looking at inconsistency. Hang on, we've got a hearing going on here, what happens to the next one, etc. So that was our main concern, but thank you.
Mr. Jarman, would you like to add a...
Yeah, I think Councillor Mortimer raises a very good point, and it created a practical problem for me in that, dare I say it, I don't know if Councillor Prendergast will agree, there are some quite knotty issues between the emerging Headcorn Parish plan and our own local plan. And the Inspector, Jeremy Edge, did go through those issues. But I had to employ a consultant at quite late notice, actually. But obviously, as you know now, that is coming out of our budget. And as you've heard Mr Green's synopsis.
Councillor English.
I mean, yes, obviously this is a concern that money is spent, but at the end of the day, this is the process that's been set out. And if it does result, hopefully, in a good set of documents, where the local plan and the neighbourhood plan is in reasonable agreement, then it will be money well spent, frankly. And you know, it will be a process that has been shown to be robust, and I hope that that will be the case. Certainly it's something that is unavoidable, because if with all the issues that came up, you know, a hearing is certainly the simplest ways to expedite matters. Otherwise we'd be going round in circles for a very long time, and it costs considerably more.
I think over the last couple of years we've learnt an enormous amount about neighbourhood planning, put a lot of effort into getting our processes correct and helpful, and this is the first instance we have of this particular scenario, and it does raise a very interesting point of, do we budget actually for some of the support work that's needed? So we've heard reference to additional manpower via a consultant. So when we do come to that budget setting moment, these are the kinds of things that you can't keep cutting everything if you want to maintain a service and have the flexibility to do so. Nothing further to say, Mrs. Parks?
Sorry, Chairman. I'd just like to add as well that on the back of progress being made with the local plan, neighbourhood plans are moving apace. We have a pre-submission consultation ongoing at the moment at Lewes, which officers are looking at. Cox Heath have indicated they're likely to be submitting their plan fairly soon. So things are still moving ahead. So I would support what you've just said in terms of ensuring that we have sufficient resourcing. Thank you.
Yeah, resourcing is everything. May I ask that we note the update that we've received? Is that agreed? Thank you. Now, if I've got the two halves of my briefing note correctly aligned, it is Mrs. Parks once more with an update on the local plan examination.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This one is probably the briefest report. Really just, again, an update to the committee for information. The committee's considered the local plan through its formative stages: preparation, publication, submission to the Secretary of State, and so it's quite right that the committee is also regularly updated in regard to progress with the examination, rather than just leaving you guessing. Hearings are now underway. We had a first tranche of hearings that commenced early in October, with a short recess towards the end of October, and recommenced again today. So for some of us it's been rather a long day. We've been in here for quite a few hours now. Early sessions during October largely covered strategic matters, housing need, the settlement hierarchy and issues along those lines. We had a helpful transport modelling seminar where the County Council, Highways England and the Borough Council were able to discuss the emerging modelling and transport evidence. And then we moved on to issues around environmental constraints and the South East Maidstone strategic development area. The sessions now, starting from today, are focusing on more detailed matters. We had a long session today about Lenham and the other rural service centres, moving into employment tomorrow and retail and mixed development on Thursday, before we consider the development management policies, transport and infrastructure and then some alternate site proposals later in the programme. Really, that's it, just in terms of the update with progress. I'll happily take any questions that anybody has, but there will be a further update brought to the committee in the new year, depending on conclusions of the examiner and the timescales. There may be an opportunity to begin to look at the inspector's modifications or early findings. It may just be that it's simply a progress update. Will obviously be in the hands of the Inspector, Mr Miller. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Mrs Parks. Very thorough. Councillor Clark, did you want to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chairman. My point is really a procedural point. I don't want to get involved in the content of the local plan, but from my own perspective, I did give feedback for Regulation 19 in March. I met the deadline. Coming up to the hearings, I made officers aware of my desire to speak at the hearings in July. When we got close to the October hearings, I couldn't see a plan, so I tried to chase to find out where I would be able to submit my, or where I'd be able to participate in the hearings. And I found out, just as the hearings were started, that my feedback for the local plan was not included. So I really wanted to sort of make members aware of this, because I think there may be a risk that we haven't covered everyone's feedback from the local plan. There was a little bit of discussion. Initially, I was told that my feedback didn't make the deadline, so I gave evidence to show that it did make the... I followed the process as it was stated, and I did get it in for the 18th of March. And after some consultation, including the inspector, I was allowed to participate in the hearings. It turns out that the root cause was that my submission, which was specifically relating to housing policy within the local plan, was basically not put towards the local plan consultation, but put towards the integrated transport strategy consultation, which is a discretionary consultation as part of the process. Now, I did ask that officers consider this and consider whether there could be others out there that have given consultation for the local plan that has not been included, and whether or not that's something that we need to look at. It seems very bizarre that it would just be me that's given feedback that's come across this sort of this issue. And I do wonder if maybe at the very minimal we could look at all consultation that was given for the local plan and all consultation that was given for the integrated transport strategy, and look at the delta between the two and see whether we need to look at those, anything that's different, to see whether it does include local plan feedback. But as much as anything, I just want to give you my feedback, because if I had not asked to participate in the hearings, I would have had no idea whatsoever that my feedback to the local plan wasn't incorporated.
I'm wondering whether it would be too detailed to get a response. Are you able to add anything to that, Mrs Parks?
Thank you, Chairman. In response to Councillor Clark, yes, the Council does acknowledge that there was an administrative error in the handling of his representation, and as he suggested, it was batched up with the integrated transport strategy comments in error. His representation, when that was raised to us, was found. It was added to the consultation. The inspector for the local plan was notified, and he was notified that we did accept that it was duly made under the regulations, and yes, he was entitled to speak at the examination and did so. I do appreciate that that error was made. On the back of that, I personally checked through every integrated transport strategy consultation response and made sure that any that were in there that should have been also included on the local plan consultation had been, and that was the case. Unfortunately, it was just Councillor Clark's that had not been picked up.
I think that's a very full answer, and we have the reassurance that there has been a check, so thank you, Mrs Parks. Members, anything to add, or do we just note the... Right, so with your agreement, that's noted, that update. Thank you very much. which brings us nicely into item 20. This is some background work in relation to the Transport Operators Group. Mrs Ward, you're going to lead us into this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. So this report considers the establishment of the Maidstone Transport Operators Group. This was last considered by this committee on the 8th of March 2016, where the committee initially considered the re-establishment of the Maidstone Transport Users Group, which was focused on day-to-day operational issues and also provided a link between parish councils and the public transport service operators. During the March committee meeting, the following issues were raised in regards to a potential transport group: that clear terms of reference would be required. The group should not discuss specific service issues and should instead be focused on more strategic public transport issues. Clear lines of communication for the group would be required, and also that duplication of work carried out by other groups should be avoided. And these groups include the Kent Community Rail Partnership, the Quality Bus Partnership, and also South East Rail Passenger Group. It was therefore concluded at the meeting of the 8th of March that the group should be a transport operators group as opposed to a transport users group, and that service users would be represented by an attendee from the Kent Association of Local Councils. It was resolved that a transport operators group would be established. Organisations to whom invitations would be extended to attend the group would be Maidstone Borough Council, Kent County Council, Arriva, New Venture, South Eastern Rail, Highways England, and the Kent Association of Local Councils, and we'd asked for one representative from them. It's also been suggested by Kent County Council that the local NHS Trust may wish to be invited to attend. The group would be set up and run on a quarterly basis by Maidstone Borough Council officers from the planning policy team with support from Democratic Services, and quarterly reports to this committee would be submitted from the group. The net minimum officer attendance cost would be £350 for each meeting. So there are two options available to members. Firstly, the Maidstone Transport Users Group could be established with clear terms of reference agreed at the first meeting to include the appointment of Maidstone Borough Councillor as chairman of the group. In this option, members are also asked to nominate representatives to the group. Alternatively, strategic transport issues covering both bus and rail could be dealt with at one of the existing groups which considers public transport and is attended by the service operators. This would be the groups previously listed and would require their terms of reference to be amended. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Grigg, I'll take you first.
Thank you very much. I would actually just like to query something on page 141, which comes under the financial heading. I note and have been told again this evening that the cost of each of these meetings will be £350. Well, as it states in 2.9 that the reports are going to be prepared by NBC officers, that these are going to be quarterly meetings. Can someone just tell me where the money is coming from for this, where the budget is? Because if I remember rightly, when we did costings during the governance review, a meeting at this town hall came out at between 1,000 and 1,500, which is a very different figure to 350. If it is, if it is closer to 1.5, and we're talking quarterly, we're talking £6,000 a year. And as I see here, it says this will be met within existing resources, but I would like to know exactly where the money is coming from for this.
Mr Green, if you could help us there, especially given the overspend that we've actually already looked at this evening.
The cost of running this group would have to be addressed as part of the budget setting process, and it may be that there would be other costs that would have to be reduced to accommodate it. Otherwise, it would be a budget growth item, and the figures concerned would depend not just on whether it's the figure cited here of £350, but also whether there's the capacity within the planning service to provide this, because these figures are assuming that the group could be supported from within the existing officer corps. It may be that if the service is under pressure, they would have to go outside and bring in an agency member of staff to do it, which would mean a higher cost than the 350. And Mr. Jarman would have to comment on whether they could handle it within their existing capacity or whether they would need extra capacity.
That was my concern, because on the basis of what I've heard from that personally before, I know we've agreed to do this, but before we go any further, I think it would make sense for this to go to P&R for an updated assessment of the financial commitment to this.
Okay. You did indeed, Councillor English. If we could just deal with this financial issue as a round of questions first, perhaps. So, did you want to come in on the financial aspect?
Yes, I'm a little disappointed, Mr. Chairman, because I actually, for a number of reasons, not least because we are in the middle of the local plan examination, actually originally asked for a full report on this, which I rather assumed would include the financial issues. I certainly asked that it would come to this committee in February or March next year. I was somewhat surprised to see this report come forward without those issues being considered, because I'm conscious that there are issues about servicing and finance. I'm also conscious of the fact that we have actually got to do something if we are going to deliver an integrated transport strategy to get the transport users all in one flipping room and actually get something out of those who have been difficult to respond to. But I'll come back to that. But I really wanted this report to come when it was complete, with all of the relevant elements to this committee. And I think it should come to this committee in the first instance and not be shoved off to P&R, because there was strong support in the scrutiny review from the public transport operators. There was strong support from many members of this council, and there was strong support from previous policy officers, including Steve Clark, who has sadly now left this council. So I do think there's a lot of merit to it, but we do have to bottom out these issues that the Vice Chairman has correctly alluded to. And I really do think this report is premature, and it should come back to the committee on the timetable I originally asked for, with the full report I originally asked for, and not be either approved or disapproved at this point.
I may be in part to blame for that then, Councillor English, because it was my impression that at several meetings you'd pushed for progress on this item. So if the consequence is it being premature,
yes,
I apologise, but it was actually because of your repetition of asking to see some tangible progress that we actually have this on the agenda tonight.
I apologise, Mr. Chairman, if there was any misunderstanding, but might I sincerely beg the committee to put this back on the timescale I had originally suggested for the work programme, and with the details that the Vice Chairman has requested, rather than decide one way or the other.
So we're moving on a little bit, and I'd like to just pick up a little more thoroughly on this financial thing. So we actually have some figures in the report, extremely useful, but I just think completely fundamentally flawed. You know, if we are being presented with something that we have to weigh in the balance of value and good use of public money, you know, it is not £20 an hour we're talking about. That's, as I understand it, Mr. Green, pretty much pure salary cost. No desk, no phone, no turn the lights on, no printer, no paper in the printer. And the on cost is, in actual fact, very significantly more than what we see. So we need some evidence, but you know, that figure that was mooted when we were looking at governance review of a typical cost of organising a meeting, perhaps in a venue such as this, with officer support, £1,000, £1,500, I think is very... That I find believable. £20 an hour, I don't. I'll come back to you then later. So we do need some substance to that. But whether it's 350 or 1,500 a go, as I understand it, our financial position currently says we're actually overspending. There's no spare to do it. So we do need, through the budget setting process, which is overarched by P&R, a line built in somewhere that says there's resource to do this, or there isn't. And perhaps the larger, perhaps a healthier way of looking at it, there are various other groups that we attend, we function within. Now, I can buy into this if we don't need all of those and can have a more holistic approach of one group, but to have those continue in existence and our participation and add this on top, I do have a fundamental difficulty with. And we can ask Mr. Jarman directly about capacity to resource this, but I would add that I did take the liberty of speaking to Mrs. Woodhouse earlier, because there is a line in here about democratic services supporting it. She was very polite in what she said. In industry, we'd have probably used less polite words, but there ain't no resource there in excess at the moment. So, you know, the first 2 hours of the extra person you have to get are the most expensive 2 hours. If there was 2 hours left in the last person, they can be argued to be less expensive, but there's no capacity there. Mr. Jarman, what your view on planning side?
Yes, there is. The way I look at this is that if an officer is organising this meeting, taking minutes, etc., he or she is not doing something else. The budget for the local plans team, if it was ever to come from that budget, is purely for the local plan at its simplest.
Councillor English, you wanted to say something further.
I mean, this is just a comment that in terms of if it is, it may not be impossible to look at whether or not certain external sources of funding or sources of funding that relate to delivering the integrated transport strategy or Section 106s could be applied to certain elements of this work. Russell Fitzpatrick was talking about certain approaches which are similar in other respects. I'm not recommending anything, but I just would say that a bit of lateral thinking may be possible here. But what I would say is that we are in no way in a shape to write a report here and now.
So I would venture to suggest that the recommendation per the papers is not even on the table at this point. Given that this has been an item that you've, shall we say, followed closely, Councillor English, what, in your view, is our next step? What are we saying to P&R at this stage? Give us some thought. Or Mr. Cornell, can you help us here?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, you know, obviously the merits of what are being proposed are clear, and I think it's something that we should look at in the planning review and see, and I think we could find solutions in terms of how we structure the department, and so I'd be pleased to take it away and see what can be achieved through that line of inquiry. If the desire is to have this further committee, we need to work out how we can structure things better to better serve it, so it doesn't become an additional cost. It's got to actually work for the officers as well to make things run more efficiently. So I'll be pleased to do that.
That seems fairly sensible to me, that within that, and perhaps within that, we consider some of those other groups that we participate in and a possible rationalisation that could happen. Councillor Wigan, did you want to?
Very briefly, I think you're right there. I think firstly we just need to know how much this is likely to cost if we want to do it. Then actually we have to have a look at strategically what we want to do. And if, you know, with the way we know the budget's going, if we are going and saying, actually, we need to do it like this, and the cost of it is that, that's the proposal that we then make for the budget.
Mr. Jarman.
Yeah, I'd like to agree with Mr. Cornell. I think Councillor English is alluding to this. Yeah, this is very laudable. It's a sort of implementation committee, working group, whatever one wants to call it. But I do think it's best looked at in the rounds because, as I said before, the budget for the local plan was to take it to examination. What we're talking about now, and this is just an example, is the implementation of the local plan. That's transport, open space, etc., etc.
So, may I suggest then that we are asking for the formation of this group to be given consideration within the planning review alongside the operation of other similar groups to find if it is possible and the most appropriate way to fund and resource their implementation. Okay, so I think we'll have that formally, as I've just said, as recommendation. Councillor English, would you wish to second that? Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I think that concludes things for this evening. 8:15.